Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Why is AIDS, after 20 years, still ravaging Africa? Are there no solutions, no effective strategies? Well, today our guest is going to talk about an untapped resource that will bring hope on this crisis to Africa. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Ugandan physician and theologian Peter Okaalet, who works in Nairobi as Senior Director of Health and HIV/AIDS Policy for the Christian medical assistance group called MAP International. Welcome, Dr. Okaalet.
Thank you, Shirley.
It's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
You, as a Ugandan physician, started this journey yourself on a path of bridges because of a personal acquaintance you had who challenged you about HIV/AIDS work. Can you tell us that story?
The name of this young man was, let's call him John, just to protect his identity. Although he's gone to be with the Lord now, and that was in 1988. I was taking care of him together with one or two other doctors. But 4 days before he passed away, John challenged me to go back to college.
He did?
He did, and he asked me, do you believe in life after death? I said, yes, the Bible talks about life after death. I quoted from John, quoted from scripture, from 1 Thessalonians, about the Lord coming back, those who are dead in Christ rising up, being caught up with him in the air.
Yes.
So we'll be reunited with him forever.
So he talked about the resurrection.
Yes. And he wasn't quite sure if he was going to heaven or going to hell. He knew how he had contracted the disease, and I could feel his pain, but he was desperate.
Yes.
And his challenge to me was, your medicine is not helping you to help me. If I were you, I would study theology, so when people are dying in your hands, you promote them to glory, to heaven, this heaven that you believe in.
So he said to you, you're already a doctor.
Indeed.
Like, go back to seminary.
Indeed.
And be trained as a theologian.
Yes.
Because this HIV/AIDS issue is a theological, spiritual, religious issue as well, isn't it?
Indeed, but then medical schools, at least traditionally, don't prepare us for the spiritual dimension of health.
Right.
Psychosocial issues. I graduated as a medical doctor in Makerere University. That's in Kampala, 1979.
Right.
So by 1988, I had practiced for about 10 years. And his challenge was, but you look after the physical. People live up to about 60, 70 years. Then they die.
Right.
But if they are to go to heaven, they will live forever and ever and ever. Why don't you go back to school?
So you did.
Study? So I did. My wife took 2 years convincing, because it wasn't until September of 1990 when we eventually went to the Nairobi Evangelical Graduate School of Theology in Kenya.
And your work today with MAP International very much unites the medical piece and the theological piece, doesn't it?
Indeed. I suspect that's why the Time magazine, November of 2005, called me a bridge builder, bringing together the physical and the spiritual dimensions of health, talking not just within the hospitals, but also in the churches and congregations.
So when you're given an award by Time magazine, it does help you publicize your work, doesn't it? It gives the work visibility.
Indeed. Right now, there is lots of publicity. I get many invitations to go to speak at conferences and universities. I was here only about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Middle of November last year, I was at the Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, talking to a group of students.
So you go to secular places like Rush University, you travel to all over Africa, all over Central America, a really globe-trotting kind of life now. And it's because MAP International is trying to educate both physicians and seminarians on how to relate with people with AIDS.
Yes, our tagline below our logo reads health and hope for a hurting world.
Health and hope for a hurting world.
And that should be hope not just for the here and now, but also the there and then, when we eventually translate into another life.
But the churches haven't been so good at this. I mean, historically, the churches have been condemning of people with AIDS. Isn't that true?
In Africa, yes, that is correct, Shirley. The church has gone through 4 stages. 1, judgment.
Right.
Pointing fingers at those who are sick. Get them out of the church because they're embarrassing us.
Yes.
2, kind of a lame response. You know, when somebody's lame and you try to greet them,
yes.
you really don't get the proper
it's
African
it's
handshake. It's a bit lame and so on.
It's not really committed, is
because they are really not sure what to do.
Ambivalent.
And then the third one is a bit hesitant, cautious, because the pastors fear to touch somebody with HIV and AIDS, because they are really not educated many of them are not educated in the ways how people contract HIV and AIDS.
So a fear that they'll get it themselves.
Indeed.
Yes.
Or their relatives and so on, through handshake and so on. So they need, what we do at MAP International is to walk them through the modes of transmission of the disease. And we really want them to get to the 4th stage, which is really wholehearted, welcoming, zero tolerance to stigma of those who are HIV positive and their relatives.
But how do they get past the judgment piece, especially from the religious side? Let me ask the impolite question.
Okay.
Isn't it really just undisciplined sexual practice that leads to this disease? So maybe this is the consequence.
Several factors. That could be one of them, but the other one could just be plain ignorance, not knowing. And then people are overcome with all sorts of temptations, especially when they're under the influence of alcohol and so on. So then the pastors, the verses that I normally quote is Psalm 11 verse 3. If the foundations are destroyed, what should or what will the righteous do? Another one, John 8:32. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Right.
John 10:10. I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly.
Right.
And HIV and AIDS certainly is the opposite of abundant life.
So when you found the church full of judgment and empty of compassion, do you see there's been a tide change?
There has been a movement. These days I prefer the word movement rather than program. Somebody has said programs start big, but they end up very small.
Yes.
Movements start very small and they grow big. The movement, the Jesus movement. That's why you and I are here today in a Christian college and an atmosphere. So slowly by slowly, as they begin to get new knowledge, which impacts on their attitudes, which impacts on behavior. Many times, Shirley, we want to change people's behavior there and then if possible. But I think we need to step back 2 steps, give people new knowledge, which will impact on their attitudes. And then from the change in attitude, hopefully the behavior will change. And we are beginning to see that happen in Africa, across Africa.
Especially with the seminarians that you teach. One of the things you write about is that the first thing that a new pastor will do after graduating from seminary is perhaps bury someone with AIDS.
That is correct.
And yet, before MAP International really started this movement of training, they were not equipped. So they came and were unskilled and probably afraid. And yet they had these responsibilities. Tell us what kind of training these seminarians get.
Right now we have a curriculum that's being implemented in about 16 theological institutions in Africa,
16?
including 16, 16, including the Cornerstone Christian College, which we talked about earlier on, and then also the College of the Transfiguration in South Africa, then in Limuru, St. Paul's United Theological College. That curriculum has 3 units. The first one is on human sexuality. The second unit is on mobilizing the church to respond to challenges that congregations face and the pastors within their communities. And then the third one helps them to design a program, a project, or even words to use in a situation such as you have just quoted, when they are burying somebody who has died of HIV and AIDS. So without that kind of preparation and training, pastors would normally shy away. Would be very scared to talk about this because the family themselves would not even want to know that their relative died of HIV and AIDS unless they were trained. Because
and there's the shame that's connected with that death.
That's correct.
And of course there are many children then, right? Left without parents or left with one parent. And so then poverty is one of the both beginnings of this disease and also a consequence of this disease, isn't it?
Indeed. It is said that there are about between 12 to 13 million children in Africa right now. By the end of 2010, there will probably be 18 million children who have lost either one or both parents to HIV and AIDS. And UNAIDS defines an orphan as a child who is below 15 years, who has either lost one parent or both parents to HIV and AIDS. So this is presenting a phenomenal problem for many of the communities that used to take care of orphans.
Right.
In some languages, actually, local languages in Africa, there is no word orphan.
There isn't.
Because when the family died, a parent or a mother, the community would normally come around.
So they would
children.
never be orphans,
So
in essence.
there's a sense in which there would be protection, provision of care,
Right.
support, maybe not so much education the way we know it today.
Okay.
But at least in those olden days, there would be food, clothing, and shelter for those kind of children. Now there are too many, so grandmothers are
Right.
now taking care of the young in Africa.
So this is where the church then, which is the larger unit of the nuclear family.
Yes.
They, non-related people who call themselves brothers and sisters in Christ, a family of Christ, they would then hopefully come alongside. Does it tax, though, even the churches?
It does, because of it's overwhelming. The
Yes.
problem is too big. But one of the lessons MAP has learned over the years is when the pastors, bishops, and clergy discover a biblical foundation for doing whatever it is that we're encouraging them to do,
Right.
then they get very excited about coming on board.
Okay.
But then the speed with which they are coming on board is not as fast as the speed with which
This
we are
is
creating
need.
orphans in Africa.
You've testified before the Congress of the United States and many other places because you've said, help the churches, give the churches resources because they are trusted individuals in the communities.
Yes.
What is the relationship of these pastors to the people? Why do they trust them?
There are several cadres of leaders in Africa. One is the chief of a
Yes.
village, and presidents in Africa, I describe them as chiefs of villages called nations.
Okay.
So really people respect them.
Okay.
And then the other ones are elderly people. In Africa, traditionally, we respect the elders because of their age, and the young tend to respect the
And are
older
there
people.
enough elderly people?
Especially women who are now taking care of these orphans, and
Okay.
so on. There are quite many of them. Then the other third group of people are the pastors. They talk about, as I said earlier, the here and now,
Yes.
life here and now, but they also talk about a possibility of life after death. And of course, when people are Christian, even when they are not Christian, I've noticed they tend to want to bring their dead to church to be prayed over before they are buried and so on. So somehow it is this, we are created in the image of God.
Yes.
Yeah, this holistic, physical, spiritual, the soul, flesh dimension of humanity. I think they are all together.
Right.
In Africa, we don't separate the secular and the sacred. I think they are all together.
Right.
So that's where the pastors then have this respect. They gain respect they have gained respect over the years because they talk about issues that are not just for the present, but also for the future. And the Bible says when we resurrect, we'll have new bodies. They will be
Yes.
free of HIV and AIDS. And that gives hope to people who are dying. And in those days in Uganda, people would die when they are very thin. So we coined the word slim.
Slim.
Slim, S-L-I-M, to
Yeah.
describe them when they were dying. But now with the advent of ARVs, the antiretroviral
Yes.
therapy and treatment,
Yes.
it has given people a new leash of life so that even those who would normally be very thin, when there is sufficient food, comfort, nutrition, and then the ARVs, people tend to live a little long.
The antivirus medication really
Yes.
does make a difference.
And that is what the U.S. government is providing through PEPFAR, the PEPFAR program.
And is that also through MAP?
That was MAP is involved together with other organizations
Okay.
and consortia, but we play a very small role. But at least PEPFAR, through the Global Fund and partnering with other foundations and so on, they are reaching millions of people with ARVs today.
Where does that money come from?
The U.S. government voted in 2003 over 15 billion
15 billion?
US dollars to support 15 countries, 12 of them in Africa, 2 in the Caribbean, Haiti and Guyana, and then 1 in Asia, Vietnam. So my role at MAP International and this other new role as Senior Director, Health and Hope, is to work with the churches and faith-based groups to see how they can plug into the governments within their countries and how they could also benefit from some of these monies.
So let me see if I understand. So the United States government has pledged $15 billion for antiviral medications and other aid,
And other AIDS activities.
and those go to the governments.
Those go through governments, but also through some large NGOs.
Okay, and
Like,
the NGOs, the non-government.
Non-governmental organizations like World Vision, World Relief, and then MAP International, partnering with some of these organizations. Also, we access some of that money. Yeah.
When places are in immense poverty or illiteracy, how do you use the church to combat some of those problems that complicate the HIV issue?
Through microcredit, microfinance institutions, because the pastor may not be knowledgeable in all of these things.
Right.
But the people in his or her congregation, mostly it's men, in their congregations believe the pastor should have an answer to everything. So of course, when they don't have food, when they don't have money and so on, they go to the pastor.
Right.
So the wise pastors in Africa have learned to partner with others who are more knowledgeable in those areas. MAP International, we all have, our statement talks about 3 Ps.
Yes.
Provision of medicines, prevention of disease, and promotion of community health care. We also do it through partners, governments, non-governmental organizations, faith-based groups, congregations. Otherwise, the problem is so huge, MAP alone cannot embrace it.
Do you find that there is good conversations between all these various organizations? Do you find that you're replicating work, or do you find that people are willing to work together and learn from each other?
Our aim would be collaboration.
Yes.
But Shirley, as you and I know, sometimes we want to protect our turf. So there is a bit of competitions here and there. But with the time, when people come together, especially around a huge problem like HIV and AIDS, Muslims want to talk about it. Christians want to talk about it. The government is interested about talking about it. United Nations, World Health Organization, the World Bank, every institution that I know, local and international, is moving towards partnerships. Because if anyone in the institution had the answer, they would have provided it to us so long ago. But they don't. So that's why all of us are kind of in there, trying to see what difference we can make.
Do you think that enough money is being given to opportunities for conferences to bring people together, or has that been frowned on?
Conferences are both a blessing and sometimes a curse, because there are people who feel that money should be used to
actually treat people.
Yeah, treat people and give them food and so on and so forth. Then some of these meetings are held in posh hotels and so on, and it's usually the same group of people who keep attending. But I tell people there is always something new.
Always something new to learn.
To learn.
Yes.
That then if I learned it and I passed it on to others, that would be like Paul and Timothy, we talked about earlier on.
Yes.
In Paul telling Timothy, entrust what you have learned to faithful people who will be able to teach others also. That is exciting.
In many African countries, people get trained outside, doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, but don't want to go back. Is that a present problem for persons on the front line of this AIDS work?
A huge, huge, huge problem. These days we don't not only talk about brain drain, we talk about the brain flight. The number of professionals who are leaving Africa, nurses, doctors, the laboratory technicians is phenomenal. I think it goes to beyond 24,000 per year.
Per year, 24,000 per year?
For a continent, that is too big. So that even as much as we want to try to roll out the ARV program, antiretroviral treatment, if there are no health professionals to administer this, then it is like we are fighting a losing battle.
Why do they leave, and what can we do to stop it?
There is a pull factor, there is a push factor. Pull from the US, better salaries, things work, the Europe and so on.
Right.
Push because of the poverty that we talked about earlier on. And sometimes hostile governments, infrastructure that is not in place. So to the extent that we work with the governments to put this into place and then remunerate people quite well. The doctor in Africa is paid.
You have to make it worth their while to live in a very difficult situation, right?
That is a calling. It takes a calling to live in those kind of situations.
Right. But is that happening? Is that kind of change happening?
There is movement both from within Africa to try to attract professionals from some of these other countries. If not, their money. They may be staying out here, but at least let them send money back home.
Okay.
Then there is also movement at the UN level. World Bank and others are looking for ways and means of trying to attract these professionals, PhD holders and master's degree students, after they have graduated, to get back home. So it will take the West working together with Africa to try to get back these professionals.
You talk about calling, and again, this is where the religious side comes in, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because it has to be more than just a salary, probably. It has to be more than just professional satisfaction, because those two things might be very difficult to achieve. But if you see it as God asking you to give of your time and talents back to the poor, the needy, the front line, that is a higher calling.
That is correct.
And do most of the health professionals have any contact with sort of a Christian calling or a spiritual-based reason for their work?
In Africa, we say we are religious. We are notoriously religious.
We're notoriously
religious. There is
religious.
a sense in which people talk about God from morning to evening,
Right.
and situations that present themselves which demand that we talk about God. So even people who have walked away from God today, if you followed them up in their history and so on, you'll find that probably their parents, relatives were Christian.
Right.
So there is that something in every human being that kind of feels like, let me give back to society
Right.
what society has given back to me. And with this kind of meetings, conferences, schools, like Calvin and others, I think we are changing the mindset of the leaders of tomorrow, today and tomorrow. So hopefully there will be that movement back of professionals into the continent.
Yes, we hope that young people will say it is not just about my getting ahead, it is about the greater good.
Yes.
In part, we see in Africa too, our adolescents are training and educating peers. Is there a movement for the 12, 13, 14-year-old to also become educated so that they don't repeat the mistakes of their parents?
That is what has contributed to the lowering of the prevalence of HIV and AIDS in 3 countries in Africa, at least in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, despite all the challenges that are going on in that country,
Yes.
but also in Zambia and in the Far East in Thailand. It is the young people rising up, especially in Africa, saying enough is enough. And young people want answers today,
They do.
if not yesterday,
Yes.
not tomorrow. So when you give them the information, the skills,
Yes.
then they become peers, teachers, and influencers of one another. And I also like to talk about leadership, and somebody has defined, John
Yes.
Maxwell.
Yes,
In
John,
one word,
yes.
leadership is influence.
Leadership is influence,
Yes,
and young
influence.
people want influence.
They want to influence, which they will then pass on
Right.
to other colleagues.
Is there an issue at all with some of the traditions, the historic tribal traditions that stand in the way of this education on AIDS?
There are many things, roadblocks that stand in the way. One of them is just customs,
Yes.
African customs, African traditions, and so on. Some people believe when the older people sleep with the younger girl, they cleanse themselves of HIV and AIDS.
Right. Is
Some-
that still widely held?
especially in the southern part of Africa, which is why probably it's contributing to the escalation of the problem in that particular
And
region.
that is just illiteracy or just lack of knowledge, or is it that they want to believe it and they don't trust an intellectual's understanding?
When there is the fear of the unknown, people
Right.
go to church, they pray. The
Right.
pastor tells them, trust God, this will go away. They go to test, it doesn't go away.
Yes.
They go to, in southern Africa, it's called a sangoma, a witch doctor.
Yes.
These people who use herbal medicine and so on, some of them even beyond herbal medicine. So people are kind of grappling in the dark, groping in the dark. They want to hold on to something,
Right.
but they're not quite sure what that something is.
Right.
So hence some of these other myths which we need to banish, and the falsehoods and the myths. I've preached several times in many congregations in Nairobi on the falsehoods and the myths that surround HIV and AIDS.
Right.
So to the extent that we banish and push those aside, to that extent people will be enlightened and they will be equipped with the kind of truth we talked about earlier on.
Is there also a combination here about the status of women that if you can, in essence, use a young girl for your own health benefit, even if it could cause her to have AIDS and die, is there a connection here to the low status of women?
Indeed. Hence, Akimota, Dr. Agre
Yes.
Achimota of Ghana coined the phrase, educate a man, you educate one individual. Educate a woman, you educate a nation. And also in the health sector, we know it's not always the medicines, the doctors, and the laboratories that really bring health. It is the education. So if girls are given a minimum of education as much as maybe 10 years, primary education, part of secondary education.
So girls get 10 years of education almost to high school, is it?
And then
needed?
they drop off for various factors, again, because of poverty and cultural issues and so on.
Right.
But if they were to continue in school, that would help give them the knowledge to know how to bring up their children.
Right.
That would cut the number of communicable diseases and so on, because then the mother would be equipped with the information that they would need.
Right.
First of all, to delay marriage, and
Yeah.
then also, if they get married, to take care of their children in ways that are appropriate.
And educate even the youngsters from
Yes.
the beginning.
Yes.
Yes. Is there an issue with dowry still in Africa? Does that still exist?
Yes, I had to pay 7 cows for my wife.
You had to stay what?
7 cows.
7 cows?
Cattle.
Yes.
For my wife. And,
She was probably worth 10.
she was worth more than that, and I loved her so much. So my father and I did not mind doing that. But again, because of the challenge now of
Yes.
HIV and AIDS and so on, and poverty, not many people are even able to raise. So some of the church leaders and bishops in Kenya, at least, are now talking about changing some of these traditional.
Because you might not even get
customs and so
married
on.
then.
How then can somebody get married if the relative of the bread earner and so on has died?
Right.
Who would have helped them to get married?
So then you don't have the stable relationship. You have actually perhaps the multiple partner problem.
This is it.
Yes.
So it takes time, and somebody has said the journey, the Chinese is it who have said the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. But I think we are taking several of those steps in various aspects of our challenge to this problem.
You are helping us all on the journey,
You're welcome.
Doctor.
You're welcome. Thank
My
you.
guest today has been Ugandan physician and theologian Peter Okaalet from the Christian Medical Assistance Group, MAP International. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.
Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
The world that awaits.
Gifts that are yours to explore.
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.